Hello, apologies for that. Here. All right. So yeah, shall we start with the judges' accolades for the open finals?
The floor is yours.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Andre, and thank you very much, everyone. These are your judges for the open finals. These are individuals with esteemed background and very, very stacked debating CV that we definitely thought has performed really well in this tournament as well. So they very much deserve to be judging the open finals for this esteemed event. Here are those 9 individuals judging the open finals. The first is your champion from last year, Nisha Icha Alistasia from University of Mataram. Not only she has championed last year's NUDC, she was also sent to Belgrade WDC as an official contingent from Pusprespas, as well as a breaking judge of Dipo Open 2022. The next is Bobby Ongkojoyo, representing Universitas Surabaya, but currently studying in Binus University. He's the Open Octo finalist of Docksbridge Pre-Worlds 2022, champion of FT 2022, ALSA UI 2022, AEO 2019, HPP 2018, and 2022, as well as a Green Debate Open 2021, grand finalist in John Hopkins Open 2022 in the ESL category, Dipo Open 2022, Nusantara Debate Open 2022, Atma Open 2020, and Jofe 2019. He's also the semifinalist and 5th best speaker of NUDC 2019 and the CAP of IVED, ALSA, and Argumentum Antarsiswa. The next is Elgar Mario Yandika from University of Indonesia, who championed IFED 2022 and Smash 2022, Sanata Dharma Open 2022 and SAFEDC 2021, and many more. Grand finalists of many tournaments, including NOFET, EP, Argumentum Pro-Ams, AUI, Atma Open, Argumentum Open, Green Debate Open. Also, the ESL quarterfinalists of Belgrade Worlds 2022 that's just recently finished, and last year was EFL semifinalist of Korea WDC. He's also the recipient of the Roderick Cibrani Trophy semifinalist of NUDC 2021, and finally the CAP of ALSA UI, Argumentum IV, Dipo Open, and FT, etc. The next is Jessica from USU, one of the divas with only a single name. She's the ESL Grand Finalist and top 5 ESL Best Speaker of Melbourne Mini 2020, the champion of JDF Open 2021, breaking judge of NUDC 2020 and 2021, as well as the Open Finals judge of AEO, GLC Debate Open in India, NUDC, and the CAP of USU Open in 2021 and 2022. All right, the next is the Lang from UC London, Judah Purwanto. He is the ESL finalist of Cambridge IV, Open Breaker, the only Indonesian ever to break in Worlds. That would be in Belgrade WDC, and also the top EFL speaker, top 10 that is, in Mexico WSTC during his high school times. Judah is the champion of Founders Trophy, Atma Open, and Dipo Open, best speaker of Ganesha Open, Borneo BP, NYU Abu Dhabi IV, Sumatra Open, UMSU Open, Aristotle Cup, and finals judge of Shanghai ABP in the EFL category, Cambridge Schools IV, Imperial IV in the ESL category, LSE IV, UCL IV, UNSW IV, Beihang Open, KO Open, St. Andrews Open, Korean InterVarsity Debate Championship, a lot. Judah wanted to stack, and I'm regretting that decision, but welcome Judah to the panel. All right, the next is the NUDC CAP of 2020, Madeline Claudia from Atmajaya Jakarta, the EFL champion of ABP 2019, the EFL grand finalist of Australs 2019, top 10 best speaker of NUDC 2019, ALSA UNPAD 2018, ALSA UI 2019, and ACDC by ALSA UGM 2019, invited for NUDC 2021, NSDC 2021, NOVET 2021, and the CAP not only for 2020 as NUDC, but also ALSA ICAM UI 2020 and Argumentum IV 2022. All right, the next is our best performing IAs for this year. Our best performing N1 judge, for this year from Institut Teknologi 10 November in Surabaya. It's Omahira Al-Kahfi, who's the Open third runner-up of Argumentum and Atmajaya Pro-Ams 2021, open second runner-up of IDO 2021, co-second runner-up of Dono 2021, breaking adjudicator of Purpose Fed 2021 and Agat Unan 2022, open octa finalist last year, and third runner-up of Kandi 2.0. Very much well done indeed. Remarkable. Defeating many of the IAs, really. So well done. The next one is Ochi, or Yossi Febi, from Venus International. She is the Adjudication Core member of IVED 2019, IHL 2019, ALSA UE 2018, and BIPETS Program 2018, and the grand finalist of Gadjah Mada Debating Tournament in 2016 and 17, as well as Pajajara Debating Championship, PDC, in 2016. And finally, rounding up and whipping the panel into their position and their place and guiding them all is the Open Finals Chair and also the best judge for this tournament. Thank you, Omar, from UNFAD, and also recently graduated from the esteemed Columbia University in New York. Omar, they, them is DCA elect of Malaysia, UADC 2022, and Bali ABP 2022, a CAP member of 15 plus national and international tournaments, the finals judge of NUDC 5 times, Chicago Open 2022, AODC pre-WDC 2022, Leiden Open 2022. And there's a lot of 2022s here, so I'm just not going to read the year anymore. Imperial IV, Kita Open, Trinity IV, all in this year and in last year, Shanghai, Hanoi ABP, NTU Pre-World, Yale IV Fall, and Western IV. Omar is also the breaking judge of the Netherlands WSDC 2022, Belgrade WDC 2022, Johns Hopkins University Open 2022, last year in Cambridge IV, and 2 years ago in Bangladesh UADC 2020, and finally the champion of Medan BP Debate Open 2021, JDF Open 2020, Founders Trophy 2017, and Historipedia Open 2021. So that's it. Welcome the chair of the Open Finals and also all of the panelists. May you have a wonderful debate. Passing it over to, thank you, Omar, to chair the round of the Open Finals. Cheers.
Thank you very much, Upi, for the wonderful introduction. I believe everyone is here. So I'd just like to call upon the teams just to make sure everyone is here before we proceed with the grand finals. Checking if OG Airlangga is here. All right. While waiting for them, ITB, are you here?
Here.
Okay, I saw Kevin turning on their camera, so I believe that Unair is here.
Sorry, yeah, we're here.
Okay. And then closing government, do we have Gadjah Mada?
Gadjah Mada is here.
And closing opposition, do we have Diponegoro?
We're here.
All right. I believe everyone is here. So first of all, massive congratulations for making it to the Open Finals of National University Debating Championship 2022. So we are expecting a very high quality debate from all of you. And before we proceed, I would just like to invite every speaker from every team to introduce himself, starting in opening government. Airlangga, please state your name and also the speaking order as well. But please do introduce yourselves, starting from Unair.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kevin Kasuma. I'm from UNER, and I'm proud to represent UNER in the grand finals of NUDC 2022. And I'll be speaking as your Prime Minister for today. And yeah, that's all for me. On to Tata.
Hi everyone, Prashant Lakshita, known as Tata, speaking as Deputy Prime Minister in this debate. Proud to represent UNER, honored.
Thank you very much, Opening Government. I call upon the speakers from ITB to also introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Hans. I'll be the leader of opposition. Junior pronouns will be Deodram. Thank you, everyone.
Right, hi everyone. My name is Martin. I'll be DLO for this round. Hidden pronouns and good luck for everyone.
Thank you, ITB. So in closing government, we invite speakers from Gadjah Mada to introduce themselves.
Hello, so my name is Reinhardt. Speaking with me is Tere. So have fun and good luck.
All right, and then lastly, but not least, the teams from closing opposition, Diponegoro.
Hi everyone, we're the team from Diponegoro. Speaking first is Lilia and speaking second is Jessica, honored to represent Untuk. Good luck everyone.
All right, that's everybody. Thank you so much for the introduction. So before we proceed, several house rules. Number one, I highly encourage every teams to time themselves, just in case one of us got disconnected, so we know where to reconvene. But one of the panelists, in this case, Judah, will be helping with putting on the timestamps on the chat. 167, you know what they mean, and please pay attention to that so you know whether or not you can still offer POIs. Speaking of POIs, first of all, do state your preferred method of accepting POIs so you're not interrupted in ways you do not want to. And everyone, please respect and take notes of your opponent's preferred POI method. And but otherwise, if you're not stating it, we are going to assume that the default setting would be through chat. And also speaking of POI, we are highly encouraging everyone to at least accept one from each speaker so we can expect an even more engagement from everyone. So I think that's it. And can I receive confirmation from all of my panelists that we are ready to proceed? You could just react with emojis or whatever. Right? Bobby, Yossi, Made, Jessica, Anisha, Oma, Elgard, Judah?
Yep.
All right, awesome. So in that case, we can just directly proceed. I call upon Prime Minister to open the open finals of NUDC 2022 here.
Is my voice clearly audible? Okay, thank you very much. So before going on, I would like to say a few things. Sorry for a little bit of a delay. So yeah, it's been a very big honor to be able to speak in the grand finals of UDC. Even me and Tata didn't even predict that we would even go to the semifinals, but here we are in the grand finals. I would like to thank you, three groups of people. First of all, I would like to thank you. I would like to say, hey, Mom, Dad, I made it to the grand finals. Thank you for all your help. Thank you for all your prayers. The second one would be thank you to Airlangga Debating Society and every single coach that has helped me, every single senior, every single friend that has helped me throughout the way. I do believe that you are a very big contribution to my success here. And lastly, thank you to Tata for wanting to become my debating partner. I really wouldn't change a thing throughout our whole journey here. You're the best debate partner that I could have asked for. Let's kill it in NUDC Grand Finals. Also, shout out to my friend Justin. He wanted to shout out, so yeah, I'll shout it out. Okay. I'm going to start in 3, 2, 1. Young Indonesians are the next generation of Indonesia and the next generation of the society. Those who matter the most and is being affected by the election the most because they are the ones that will be participating for the society and becoming the leaders after the 2024 election. Interest to choose a leader who can represent them is the biggest interest of young Indonesians because young Indonesians right now have a very big idea on the interest of social issues, feminism, on social offenses, on things such as liberalism. But more than that, they are very diverse. Young Indonesians exist everywhere in Indonesia. We have a very rich background, and I do believe the value that will be able to represent the rich background that exists in young Indonesians right now is only liberalism, proud to propose. So, okay, I'm going to give you two framing before going on to debate. Better democracy that we want in opening government exists under two metrics. First of all, equal representation of values that people have. It means a better democracy because democracy are values for the people's representation. But secondly, full participation or more participation of people inside the democracy in itself, because I would propose to you that democracy means nothing if the people do not participate inside democracy. So the argument that will be able to win this debate is the argument that can prove that equal representation of values happen, but also more participation or full participation of people inside the democracy in itself. Two pieces, and And second mechanism will that we're going to choose the most liberal candidate possible. So I guess if Op wants to throw that, oh, your argument won't run if there's no liberal candidate, we're going to choose the more liberal candidate, but I'm going to explain to you why there will be an incentive for the candidates to become liberal in our side of the house. Two pieces of arguments in this debate: why liberalism is the most principal value to be upholded and will bring you the most equal representation, and secondly, why this will increase the probability of participation of young individuals and why this will succeed in our side of the house. So firstly, why liberalism is important and kids who are interested in democracy will only be able to fulfill their interest through liberalism. Because liberalism is the political view that can result into the best discourse available. In Arab Saudi, women cannot drive because you do not have the value of liberalism that allows you to do the discourse, that allows for women to participate in discourse because they have a single set certain of value. The discussion cannot be done and you cannot have representation of other values. So under political system in itself, liberalism is the most principally justified system to be glorified by the young people of Indonesia because of their very diverse natures as an Indonesian. We understand that people in Indonesia exist with very, very many backgrounds. So in order to be able to cater all to these backgrounds, we need a political system that focuses on social sovereignty in itself, a political system that focuses on equality in itself, a political system that will be able to represent every single value, or will be able to represent the most relevant value that exists, not as a political system that can only represent a single value. This is why liberalism under principle itself should exist given the backgrounds of the people of Indonesia. But why this will increase the probability of participation of young individuals? Before I go on that to POID.
Yeah, what will be the stance of Indonesian youngster in your side about conservatism and Islamism in Indonesia?
I'm going to answer to you why conservatism and Islamism is still answered under liberalism. Okay, so why this will increase the probability of participation of young individuals. This is a very important case. We are facing 2024, which is a very detrimental time. We do not have a leader who is actually liberal. We are struggling with values that exist in Indonesia, which are not liberal enough. Because values for conservative people, value for Islamic people are already represented incarnate in Indonesia, but some individuals or most individuals who feels represented by the liberalist values, their values are not being represented at all. I'm going to explain to you on why liberalism will be able to represent these certain values and also keep these conservative values into relevancy in itself. To have better participation, you need to appeal to millennials and young kids. You need to give a reason for them to vote and to choose. We need a leader who does not only represent old people, but we also need values that also represent liberalist values. Why participation is very important is because kids will only be able to create a difference on the betterment of democracy, participate in the proliferation of the country once they are interested in helping and participating in political discourse. The issue Indonesia has, such as social justice and social norms, has not been solved because there is no pressure that exists. Exactly the strive for a more liberal leader increases the amount of participation, like my last point. This then brings an enormous amount of pressure for the government, regardless who is around to choose the president. The likelihood analysis on why liberalist values will be able to increase participation is because, first of all, I've explained to you on how the very many backgrounds exist. And since the very many backgrounds exist, there exists no single political value that could encompass all of this together. But the reason why participation is very important is because people need to feel relatability to the values that they participate. So if we as the young Indonesians actually choose a value that people will more likely be able to relate with, they will actually participate inside the democracy itself. But I'm going to explain to you why the participation inside the democracy itself is something that is very important in our side of the house. Because participation inside democracy, participation inside political discourse means that the young people of Indonesia understand politics more and care about the country more. The prerequisite of them being able to give back to the country, the prerequisite of them being able to ask for what they want to the country is them participating in the discourse in itself, participating in the process of democracy in itself, for them to be able to understand the values that they want, for them to be able to communicate the values that they want. So a political value that incentivizes the young Indonesians to deliver their value to the politicians will be the value that wins in this debate. But why is there a likelihood for politicians to actually accept this value? Why is there a likelihood of us winning? Because since we are gathering more Indonesians, because people can relate with liberalism, because liberalism fight for the equality of values, most people want equality of values. Most people agree with equality of values. Since there is a very big amount of young Indonesians that will come into this debate, that will come into this discourse, this creates precedent precedents, this creates pressure for the politicians to act more liberal because they want votes inherently. So this is why the politicians increasingly will act more liberal. But even in our worst case scenario of the politicians being chosen, the president being chosen, not actually becoming not actually the one that is most liberal, why the participation of a certain value in democracy is still way more important rather than winning. Because participation of a single value in democracy means that this value is currently in the discourse, means that people discuss the idea of liberalism. This looks like RCTI looking at young Indonesian people in the streets going to fight for liberalism. This looks like the online debates that exist in Indonesia discussing liberalism. So even if the value does not win, the constant perpetuation of the value in itself that exists in the media, the constant perpetuation of the value that exists in the political discourse will create a precedence for liberalism to exist in Indonesia in itself, will create a pressure for the people, will create a pressure for the politicians to uphold to these values. Because now the politicians know what we want. Now everyone in Indonesia knows what young people want. Since this value has already created a footprint in the political discourse of Indonesia, this value in itself is the one that is going to be proliferated in the political discourse. We will create pressure for the politicians to uphold these values. Proud to propose vote for Airlangga for champion.
All right, I thank the Prime Minister for that speech. To open the case on the opposition team, I call upon the leader of opposition. Here.
Check for everyone, is this audible? Right. Just like PM, I'll just want to give shout out for several individuals. Firstly, of course, student English family ITB, especially senior like Upi, Santo, JNG, Han, Fahri, and many more. Without them, me and Marvin will improve this much until we're able to speak here today. Secondly, of course, TAP team, Andre, Lala, Ariel, T, Sam, Iron, that not just there for being co-worker for me, but they have become a family that I can be vulnerable into, that without them, I might have stopped debating in our cause. Thirdly, of course, Angie as a special person for me, Kobokan Nairu for obvious reason, if everyone knows. Fourthly and lastly, Marvin for being the best teammate I can ask for. Thank you for bearing with my pre-round rituals, yelling, and those things. Right. Without further ado, gender pronouns, they are them. POI, please do it on the chat. I'm gonna start my speech in 3, 2, 1. 3 points of clarification. Firstly, liberalism doesn't mean everyone can enter political discussion. Liberalism includes active barrier or freedom restriction. That is to say, you barricade inclusion of Islam in the politics. You barricade conservatism and culture of Indonesian moral guide, Indonesian general society moral guidance to eventually enter the politics. Because you don't want them to eventually restrict a certain freedom, like maybe freedom of sex or other type of freedom. But what you need to notice is that as youngster Indonesians who care about democracy, you also care about representation of value of what Indonesian people cares of. So I don't understand why then opening government just chunk it up and says that every Indonesian youngster is liberal like us, the debater. But secondly, OG is very offensive. Generalizing Indonesia youngster only to debater that is inherently liberal. I think young Indonesian is also include those who are really care in terms of conservatism, who really care about value like culture, for example. They also must be included in the debate. I don't think that they can just fly by saying that every single individual are liberal in this particular case. Thirdly, the motion is not as collective Indonesian youngster. This is as an individual Indonesian youngster, meaning that all the argument from OG about suddenly politicians will shift into a liberal value is something that's unrealistic to happen. They need to analyze why then if a single individual youngster, for example, vote into liberalism, suddenly it shifts the entire political discourse into something that is very liberal. Hence, OG already lose this debate. So what is the idea coming from opening opposition? Firstly, set up. This is not the debate about choices. So I don't want CO to come to debate that, oh yeah, we will be willing to eventually give choices or something like that, because this is in terms of us as an individual creating a certain choices. Secondly, in our side, it doesn't mean we oppose anything regarding liberalism. We will argue that government need to argue that why it should be the main priority, even with the status quo political climate that mostly focus in terms of economic reconstruction, also representation of certain religiosity or inclusion of Islam politics, for example, so on and so forth. Thirdly, I think the counterfactual is simple. Priority will be on economic reconstruction, especially for post-pandemic, for example, that currently are very disruptive. How then we eventually rebound from economic recession, for example, and a huge amount of inflation that I eventually have within status quo. So 2 ideas. 1, why it is not a strategic move to prioritize return of liberalism. Secondly, why change happened better in side opposition. Firstly, why then is this not a strategic move to prioritize return of liberalism? Firstly, let's talk about representation. Notice that this talk about inherent unpopularity in terms of liberalism, in which tackle the idea that what kind of thing that should Indonesian youngster eventually prioritize. Because if it's something that majority of people do not really care, it means that we who care about about democracy and the increase of them cannot really participate hugely in this kind of democracy and cannot really contribute that much. Hence, if we can explain to you that the counterfactual in terms of economic or religiousity-centric, for example, is something that much more prioritized within the status quo, it means that in our side of the house, we contribute more in terms of changes inside of democracy. Notice that it should be the tipping point because neither side of the house might able to explain why liberalism can thrive, for example. Hence, what can you do is that you as an individual at least contribute in a certain political discourses, even in your local, for example, or something like that. So firstly, let's talk about representation. I think Indonesian citizens currently are not taking liberalism as an important value due to several reasons. Firstly, economic issues are far more important for them. This due to post-pandemic reconstruction, for example, that most of them are currently suffering for a lot of poverty, for example. They cannot sell their own stuff, for example, so on and so forth. Secondly, it's also in terms of focus on how the inclusion of a certain religion inside of the politics. That is to say, we see this in PKS, we see this in certain political party, for example, that have different stances in terms of how do we integrate Islam in the politics. That is to say, there is a certain party that is moderate, there is a certain party that is inherently ultra-conservatism instead of the political in and of itself. Why then the priority in terms of this, regardless of what kind of value that you might have, conservative or liberal, is more important? Because democracy is not about what is objective good or bad that we think in the liberal bubble that is very, maybe rational, maybe very logical. Democracy is crucial for people in terms of the comfortability and how they eventually contribute. This means that it requires representation and priority of focus that should be on what current context eventually exists on. In our side of the house, we prioritize this thing, meaning that we prioritize something that people inherently care about and means that we can contribute more in terms of how we eventually help people in general. Second idea, even if it is important, we'll argue that current political climate are not suitable with liberalism. What does it look like? Firstly, lack of politician with liberalism persona and interest. What does politician that we have currently run for 2024? It look like Gadjah that focus on lower class society familyhood, Anies that focus on religiosity representation, Sandiaga that focus on business and economic, or Puan that focus more on diplomacy between political party or even external international relation. All of them cater different type of actor. It is quite hard for us to eventually prioritize liberalism and be able to eventually create a necessity of good result at all, because not much of them eventually care in terms of this kind of liberalism in this particular regard. But secondly, you require also fast amount of shifting in terms of value if you want liberalism to be eventually being created, assuming that best case scenario about politicians shift to liberal access in their side of the house. Why then this is bad? Because it means a rush of policy, a rush of value eventually being created. It means that the implementation will be much more problematic because you need to eventually create 2 years in terms of planning, for example, or even to some extent 1 year, for example, because we are nearly going to 2023 and something like that. Hence, it's quite hard for you to eventually implement it in a good way, especially when liberalism require a huge amount of planning, especially when it is impacting in terms of how individual exercise a certain amount of freedom. But even if there's still a problem, even if it is problematic, we will argue that Indonesian society do not really ready for this kind of liberalism. It looks like inherent conservatism, mostly uneducated due to access, for example, or pragmatism politics. At best, you get the full-fledged liberalism. It is unclear how the establishment able to be maintained in a long term, for example, especially when not a lot of citizens eventually understand how liberalism should be implemented. Before I continue, CG.
Who are the people who deeply cares about democracy?
I don't care. Let's go. Second idea then, why change happen better inside opposition? Firstly, in terms of certain check and balance, I think government performative action and tokenistic changes is something what we see currently in terms of how we eventually represent a certain liberalism. That is to say, we are giving a platform in social media, for example, but the brave crackdown, for example, in terms of too much criticism eventually happened due to the notion of hate speech, for example, that's very much border thin line, for example, so on and so forth. I'm not saying that Indonesian government bad, but the thin line of hate speech and criticism might be something that is subjective toward individual. Hence, a bad implementation of policy eventually something that is very likely to happen. Hence, it's quite hard for you to eventually give a check and balance in terms of liberalism in comparative to check and balance for economic and those kind of inclusion of religiosity. Why then is so? Because it's far more objective in terms of how a certain individual are suffering because they don't have access to water, don't have access to electricity for them in comparative to their side of the house. Even we will argue that the prerequisite of good liberalism is economic first. What does it look like? It looks like Maslow hierarchy, for example. Stability and economy currently are very low that individuals do not really have anything to sustain themselves. It's very hard for them to eventually care in terms of identity politics, care about social justice in law, for example, because most of them do not really have access to expensive paper, for extensive newspaper, or extensive knowledge into article, for example, because they are hard enough to, they are very hard working enough to eventually just sustaining their own life, for example, so and so forth. It means they also easy to manipulate, bribing, serangan fajar, for example, because they don't really have money. It also implemented into bad bureaucracy. It's like corruption by local people because they don't really have money, like PNS only being paid 4 4 to 5 million. And this is why local PNS most likely do corruption, because they cannot sustain their own life in this particular regard. Those reasons shows the implementation of a good liberalism require a good economic stability. Hence, that should be the prioritization of Indonesian youngster. Very Kratopus.
I thank the leader of opposition for that speech. I would just like to make sure that Leah, as our new timekeeper, to be prepared to help with the timing. Okay, perfect. So that means moving forward, Leah will be the one stepping in the timestamps on the chat. So please pay attention to that. All right. So that being said, I call upon DPM to close the case from opening government here. Before that, everyone, I'm going to type in something on the chat, so please read them carefully as well. Give me 2 seconds to finalize that. All right, there you go. So yeah, in that case, DPM, all yours.
Hi, am I audible? Right. Some cheesy opening lines. Hi, mom and dad. Feels kind of weird that you guys are watching me, but thank you for supporting. Thanks to ADS, Kak Ari, Bu Edith, and everyone. Thanks to literally everyone in this chamber, because you guys are part of my debating journey. Leslie, Amos, this is for you. Three points of framework. First, liberalism isn't to be Islamophobe and isn't to be aggressively opposing to certain ideas. The idea in itself explains to you the discussion exists. That means that every ideology and ideas is welcome to begin with. We think that liberalism is rather a productive discussion, whatever Hans wants to talk, right? So far, what they have explained to you is this inherent hate of Islam and certain ideologies, which you have to understand that will still happens under the side of opposition. Anyway, right? Second, I don't get why their clarification about Indonesians' different interests and ideologies and that everyone is not a debater is relevant. Because if that's the logic, I think under our side of the house, those people can still also be included in the discussion. If not, we think that conservatism isn't always going to be rejected in liberalism itself, right? They can still exist under our side of the house and is still included in discourses. But thirdly, I think they cannot just frame that everyone is so to some extent conservative, right? The fact that the state literally young Indonesians in this motion to debate about, and you can see directly on Twitter non-debaters debating about liberalism values and direct oppositions of the patriarchal values, for example, because as Chinese Indonesian, you still have to fight for the fact that racism and discrimination still do happen in Indonesia, right? I think this clarification takes down OO and all of us also harm, because if then their idea is about oppositions of certain values, those are still happening under your side of the house. But if not, if you want a productive discussion that is not echo chambers in under one ideology that happens under opening government, right? 3 points to still frame out opening opposition. First, we never told you that every single individual is a liberal being, but we believe that most individuals are already conscious to the idea of that, to the idea that patriarchism is bad, for example. So them saying us generalizing all Indonesian is totally wrong, right? But second, we would argue that if the kids that follow Islamism and conservatism does not want to accept the values of liberalism of other people, we believe that under our principle, this is a less priority of value to be upheld. If not, it backlashes their own case, because even Hans told you that economic is the one who's going to be prioritized, right? So we think that can still happen under our side of the house. But thirdly, more than that, Islamism and conservatism already exist in Indonesia anyway. Regardless of the liberalism being glorified or not, it will still exist in politics. That means most likely a lot of our politicians, if you really want choices, or if you're that scared that your values and Islam people is going to be erased, of course, people who's standing in Islamism will still exist anyway. Exactly we think that the liberal of Indonesians do not have an incentive to participate. But what happens under opposition is that we think that liberal of Indonesians do not have incentive to participate because of lack of representation. We're not trying to erase Islamism and conservatism. We're trying to bring liberalism as an equal value to be discussed in discourse of Indonesia. 3 things I'm going to talk about, right? First, strategic moves to bring back liberalism, which is comparatively comparatively gives the most strategic one. But secondly, what Indonesian people actually wants. But thirdly, why we protect minorities, a classic extension, should not be Justin. First, strategic move to bring back liberalism, right? They talk about how in Southern school right now, there's not literally a good weather for us to bring that back because there's a lack of politicians that prioritize liberalism anyway. And they say that we cannot just fastly shift into something that's totally new in within our own ideology, right? First, I think Kevin's analysis of consent perpetuation should still stand as long as there is no response at all from your side of the house, right? Because the fact that, for example, right now you understand that you should not discriminate women exists from social media and your surrounding, even though you're not someone who's a debater, shows to you that it is much more likely and easy for you to be perpetuated by this idea. That also means that you are not going to fastly shift into some sort of ideas. There should be explanation and understanding upon why you choose to be in front of that, right? That means the reason as to why, for example, I'm fighting for feminism is not because I want to be in what is trending right now. It's because I understand the constant suffering and struggle as a woman living in a very conservative country. But secondly, even the fact that Gadjah right now, for example, is engaging in TikTok videos, or a lot of political people is engaging in the act of using social media as their own platform or a main platform, it's because they see that there's a demand from society to use that to insert their values. That means we think that it is more likely for us even to the extent of fast shifting in upon our own ideology, right? So that's the first engagement to opening opposition. I think a strategic move to bring back liberalism is not to reject them in the very first place, which I question that logic on how if you're going to really reject them in the very first place, how you're going to bring that back. But secondly, we think that there's a huge burden and huge demand for us to be a liberalistic in the very first place, knowing that we're all fighting for the equal rights of women and men, for example, or we fight for the fact that that Chinese racism in Indonesia should stop in the very first place. But secondly, let's talk about what Indonesia actually wants, because opposition frames this debate as if no one really cares about the value of liberalism. Liberalism isn't just to be a social justice warrior, it's also to fight for yourself. That means things about economics or even the value of economics, things like being agreed to free trades, for example, is still within the idea of liberalism, right? That means even if you're someone who's conservative, to some extent we believe that there's still a lot of like liberalism values that is in within what you live in daily or what you face, and that's why it still becomes important in the end of the day, right? I think even if they want to frame that economy is the main source of what Indonesia wants, because we're struggling with what we have right now, the pandemic and whatnot, even if you're a liberalistic, you are still also engaged in the idea of economic. That means the idea of economic, for example, if you want to really fight for that, is able to still exist in liberalism. Therefore, we knock out and we co-opt the benefit that all wants to take, right? But let's actually talk about what Indonesian people actually wants, right? Because not every one of us is conservative. In fact, not a lot of us is now engaging to the idea that even religion is not that important, for example, because we're constantly perpetuated with the idea that humans still have hard work, that a lot of us are still suffering and whatnot. That means because exactly we have a lot of diversity, there should be something in the political sphere that is able to represent us, and that's why we want to vote for the best in 2024. Lastly, extension. Why we protect minorities? First, I think policies, there needs to be feminism in discourses of RUPKS and affirmative actions, and the only way you get that, for example, is through liberalism. Discourses of that is only exist in opening government, right? Because under the logic of opening opposition, that means discourses about these things are still going to be prolonged, like what happened in status quo, exactly because you really hold the concept of value or even the culture of victim blaming, right? Therefore, policies on protecting minorities and women exist under the of the house. But second is participation, because what happens in opening opposition or even CO is exactly Gen Z and millennials who's more influenced and more engaging to the idea of liberalism is going to pull out because you're sick and tired of always having to choose the same leader from the same parties who have bad track records before, like P-word, for example, and they choose to pull out from the participation. If you no longer have participation from us young generations, you knock down the entire political sphere. That's why Kevin's analysis becomes really important. So it's not only about having a representation, it's about engagement. Therefore, how to close opening government, I beg you to propose the motion for Airlangga.
I thank Deputy Prime Minister for that fine speech. I'm really sorry for. In that case, to close the opening half of the debate, I call upon Deputy Leader of Opposition here.
Right, so hi everyone. I go by he, him pronouns. POI, please raise your chat. I'll start in 3, 2, 1. I'm going to secure the victory for Institut Teknologi Bandung this final by talking about 2 things. 1, political participation and discourse, and why that is actually not an important thing in this debate. Second, I'll talk about why economical improvement becomes the prerequisite for a sustainable democracy in the long run. First, let's talk about political participation and discourse. The biggest premise from opening government was that there are incentives for leaders to be liberal, and hence voting a liberal leaders would equal liberal policies. The framing here is very simple. They need to prove the likelihood of a liberal leaders being elected in the first place, because without them being elected, you're just wasting a vote. You may have better considerations, i.e. economic improvement. Your vote might be a tipping point for a leaders from a more redistributive leaders to win a certain election, but then we'll probably lose on that side if you didn't give it to the more strategic manner. So that is the important tipping point for this debate. Why is this untrue that leaders are going to have incentive to be liberal? There are 5 structural reasons. Firstly, this is simply the framing that Hans already gives, that this is just an individual making a choice and not a collective, meaning there's no a collective political pressure in general to put certain political pressure for leaders to be liberals in the first place. But second, and more importantly, we frame that there is an increase in integration of religious value, especially Islamist values, in politics. This looks like this range from regional and gubernatorial elections even to a higher levels of presidential elections, where there are more involvement of religious leader within political campaigns, for example. But 3, most of candidates also have already their own voter base that they already built their identity around. This looks like some candidates building their identity around fighting for low economic class. Some leaders frame themselves as a representative of certain religious minorities or as part of certain religious identities. This shows that shifting to become liberal is almost impossible for the majority of candidates that is very, very issued to be the next candidate election in 2024. No name dropping here, you know who I'm talking about. Fourthly, even if at best we think this is largely performative in open government world, because they are likely to just go for the bare minimum, which leads into go for a bare minimum action, such as going into television or their social media to just promote their values without really getting any meaningful political actions, even if they get elected, due to all the blockade of politics, for example, that we already explained previously. But B, this will also very likely to lead into populism, for example, insofar as they cannot actually get any meaningful policies. They can only give a speeches, for example, representing certain identity without any clear outcome as to what certain politics should look like. But 3, and most importantly, there is very minimal accountability mechanism to suggest why this particular leaders can be held accountable on open government world. Because we would say that all of these liberal values is very vague in and of itself, since open government themselves cannot concretize what these values actually looks like, insofar as most of liberal values is something that is highly debatable. It is unclear to me as to how you would hold these leaders into account on opening government, even if they get elected in the end. The comparative economic recovery, which I think is very easy to be check and balance in the first place, right? This looks like numbers on the report sheet. This looks like economic improvement, direct economic improvement that individuals can feel on the ground. Massive redistributive policy that we can see directly within the policies. This means that accountability mechanism is more likely to happen on our side. But for last and most importantly, I think the majority of people still wouldn't vote with us anyway. This means that just because people participate, like political participation, we would argue is not a virtue a priori in that side of the house, because because making people vote doesn't mean they would vote for this particular candidate. If anything, this creates a huge of tension within Indonesian society right now, which is to say that it is very contradictory to a lot of conservative and Islamist values, since a lot of freedom that we endorse are freedoms that is framed to be Western, for example, freedom that is framed to be not Indonesian, not our culture and tradition, which creates a lot of backlash within the movement itself. So people participate to go against our movement, which also hinders any progress that we want to make. But lastly, I would say that education becomes a priori important insofar as people participating into election but without any proper education means nothing on that side of the house. On discourse then, their premise on discourse was to say that, there will be more active involvement of people within political discourse. I would just posit that discourse is not a good in and of itself, because freedom or having discourse does not equal representation. I would even posit that oftentimes it is actually dominated by majoritarian narratives that is spread within that discourse, insofar as there is no direct representation of certain minority groups. We would prefer that identity politics becomes something that's utilized in a more strategic manner, rather than one that is general, that says we are liberal when conservative is going to dominate that particular freedom. I would just look at a case study in the United States, for example, where liberalism is very prevalent, but the vast majority of Asian and African Americans is still underrepresented on the United States political system, for example, which means that I'm unclear as to why liberal values on that side is going to be upheld regardless in the discourse. Before I move on to the economical aspect of the debate, also I take a POI from CG. No, 3, 2, 1. Okay, opening.
Do you think that protection for sexual offended victims can exist in discourses full of conservative representations only?
Obviously no, but insofar as you cannot prove that there is progress on your side, I don't think that's a better comparative. If we can prove that economic improvement would actually lead to better solve those issues that you care about, we actually take this debate. Let's then engage with that POI. Why economical improvement becomes the prerequisite for any sustainable democracy? There are 3 structural reasons for this. Number 1, it is a more pressing issue for the people on the ground. That is to say, a lot of people are still starving currently due to the massive economic crisis, for example, insecurity of whether they can live another month. There's a lot of paycheck and paycheck that they need to pay every month. This is to say they care more about their own livelihood rather than the values or like a very vague concept of liberalism that they themselves cannot get any meaningful impact of, which means that if we can get a leaders that can give a significant or at least some degree of economical improvement for these people. These are people who are more likely to have chances to be more open, to have access to a lot of education system, for example. This means they can, send their children to schools and to universities, in which are people who can get proper education, who are going to be more liberal and walk in that side of the house. So yeah, that is a prerequisite. But secondly, it also means that individuals who cannot make any choices in the long run should prioritize their own livelihood in the short run. This means that if the counterfactual on that side of the house is individuals are forced to make long-term decisions on politics, it is impossible for us to force that these people follow what we want. The tipping point here is simple. Economic improvement is something that people can relate to, and actually far more relatable insofar as that is something that you can see the direct impact that people can feel for their own livelihood. But the last thing I would just posit in extension is just there is a massive economic crisis for this particular young individuals that we're talking about this debate, and that economic crisis for you as an individual, it should also be a massive consideration for you to pick leaders. Insofar as you cannot live for tomorrow, I think that individual or that democracy wouldn't survive in the long run. We have shown the prerequisite for any sustainable democracy is economic improvement, and for one last time, ITB is very proud to oppose.
I thank Deputy Leader of Opposition for that speech. To open the closing half of the debate, I call upon Member of Government here.
I'm sorry, Judge, can I go to the bathroom for a very quick second? Okay, thank you very much. I'm back, thank you.
All right, cool. Whenever you're ready.
No gender pronouns, we have to check prioritize opening. Yeah, before I start my speech, I think once again I dedicate this speech to Mbak Hanum, which always being the one that I always look up for since the first time I entered the circuit. Okay, I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. 2 points of setup in closing government. First, what's our interest as young voters that deeply cares about democracy and want to prioritize liberalism? 3 things. 1, to make sure transparency and transition of politics becomes stable and catering towards the most vulnerable actor. We're talking about safe space of the minority that being oppressed in status quo, such as women and religious minority. But even if closing opposition want to also re-questioning what is actually liberalism, you can read the context like. But 2, we also want to make sure democracy develop will and current context, but also show informed consent and balanced information for both voters and politicians to know the demographic. Demand demand and also accessible discussion towards all needs. But thirdly, most importantly, we want sustainability and a standing position in current context by utilize the right momentum of distrust that exists in status quo towards incumbent government. But secondly, what is the manifestation of supporting the return to liberalism in 2024 election? Three things. One, making sure that we give demand to the political party to send cadre and member with leftist value, or at the very least, the one with campaign and promise to cater to minority. But two, we will advocate the people in grassroots and give education about how good and strong liberalism value and how strong us as a voter base, like what's happened in 2014 election when one of the candidates using us as a voter base. But thirdly, if there is true that it will at the cost of we need to compromise or even abstain, we okay with it. We prove why compromises will be better in CG, and why abstain will show the magnitude and gravity of our demand to the government. To extension, all rebuttal will intertwine. First, why government want to hear us? This is important because this is prerequisite of opening government benefit, talking about protection and liberalism of minority about policy reform and changes to fly. 4 reasons. One, government inherently needs massive voters and extra demographic to mapping the policy. That is why this become inherent incentive for government to hear us regardless how extreme our demand. Because policy needs to be reflecting about society's demand right now, so they need to open more discussion to get as much check and balances and perspective possible, especially when political field is competition. It means they will try to cater to as many voters as possible. But two, they already lose their right-wing voters base right now and can't use conservative value again, especially when there is a lot of massive backlash in their action in the past, such as police brutality towards one of the biggest conservative group in the past, leads into either conservative voters leave them or even pull out from the politics as a whole, especially when they have a lot of internal problems, such as losing an important figure, aka hated, rated, that most of the time we will try to keep. We as younger voters that hope liberalism is the only voter base that they have right now, because conservative that incumbent always rely on focus on their internal problem right now. But thirdly, they most likely want to compromise in value and ideology because this is the only way for them to can cater to younger and millennial participants. Because when we're talking about attract boomer and older voters, like what I want to say, regardless of value you want to offer towards them in your policy, they will gonna vote you regardless. Because the method of political discussion between boomer is by cult of personality and abstract idea such as protecting Pancasila, for example. There is why a lot of boomer voters still vote for incumbent, even though they literally changed their ideology to conservative policy in 2019 election. Meanwhile, in 2014 election, they use more center-left policy. But in order for catering younger voters under CG, it's harder, exactly because they already got exposure and education. That's why they were more polarized and understand all the ideology and result of policy. The conclusion of my third layer is political party want to return to liberal because this is not at the cost of them losing boomers voters, but if they don't want to do this, they will lose younger voters in your side of the house. But fourthly, economic benefit and advocacy of economic that opposition want to achieve as well as OO is not mutually exclusive. So I don't understand the significance of OO benefit. The fact that PDIT can focus on empowerment of farmer in Jateng, but at the same time, pass RUU PKS, at the same time, I don't get why this is unreasonable demand. But assuming it is unreasonable demand, I think exactly because economic benefit and post-pandemic reconciliation is basic demand, and the type of voters and political party will try to cater to this field regardless, even if you don't want to talking about this in the political discussion. PPT and PKT will try to catering towards this, for example. But second, horizontal extension. Before that, opening opposition.
Yeah, not all young generation is liberal. They can still cater young with conservatism. Arus pelangi already exists since long, no progress happened. At least in our side, we contribute to something that is crucial for general society.
Number one, yeah, that's exactly because of political apathy that you don't want to represent the liberalism in your side of the house. That is why the political is so saturated and people don't have choices because conservative is the only one. But second, the comparative is even worse in your side of the house because there is literally zero representation and discussion in your side. But second, horizontal extension. Why we should be extreme and idealist? 2 layers. Number one, assuming this debate is collective debate with fiat that all young voters have the same interest. But number 2, assuming this debate is from individual perspective, like what I want to say. First layer, as to why you will do a lot of compromises in their side, and this is bad principally and practically. That is why we want to be extreme. Politicians that spread demagogy narrative to society that impose irreversible harm and trauma towards this disadvantaged group is the one that you're gonna vote in your side of the house. They are the one that making policy that at the cost of indigenous people like omnibus law. In your side of the house, you will try to gather them as ally or choose them because literally all government bench are opposition bench argument relying their benefit on someone that they will label as lesser evil just because they provide better economic benefit. Why this is really bad? Because assuming what LO said that you have comparatively smaller power, it means you will do compromises in both sides of the house. But why you will do a lot of compromises practically in opposition? Because your advocation is going to be soft. You will okay with antagonistic policies provided by this lesser evil politician. Both advocation is really important in CG because this is prerequisite of government to want to meet in the middle with you. Because in the end, result of political discussion that exists in both sides is to achieve policy reform, right? In CG will be better when you being extreme because in a political lobby and discussion, oftentimes you will compromise in the middle ground to your opponent. That's happened in both both sides, because let's be realistic that all actors won't win-win solution when talking about changing the overton windows. But what is the differences in CG? When you're asking to the fullest extent, since first, the middle ground standard will be higher. The reason to this is because your compromise from your earlier demand will be seen as significant and a good deal by your opponent, which makes them incentivized to accept it. The comparative is simple. In opposition, the middle ground standard will be lower since earlier, so we shift the overton window significantly in government bench. It means at best in both sides can pass policy and reform institution. The change is going to be so marginal in your side because you need to cater to your opponent. What's the real example of this? For example, if since earlier your demand is to legalize gay marriage, sure, you will compromise with government because it's too extreme. But the outcome will be protection of microaggression towards LGBT. Comparatively in opposition, when your earlier demand is to pass bill to protect LGBT, tebak what will happen in your side, Marvin. You will compromise also, which the outcome of your policy will be really small, like for example, the allowance of NGO to protect LGBT, credits argument from Mbak Lia. Second layer, assuming this individual debate, let's follow the game that all want to set this debate. Why financial stability and economic policies can be the tipping point for opposition bench to win? What is the context that we want as young voters? The fact that there is awareness about democracy, equality before the law, gender minority, it means most likely you are the one that already opt out from your echo chamber and get exposure to this minority. This is bad. At the best, you can get tangible benefits such as economic because of three framing. One, in the side of the house, even if you have a lot of money, you can't enjoy it because in your side you will constantly feel guilty. You questioning yourself why you did this, for example, that you complicit with the heart of the policies made by the politician that you choose. You feel bad about yourself because all the job vacancy and increase of minimum wage that you have right now is from the reaping the benefit from minority grievances. They're so vulnerable, so you will all spend day by day in the office with feeling of guilty. Even if it's relatable, since the discrimination to Chinese individual still exists, they can enjoy in a way the benefit about trickle down. So it's really questionable. But second, talking about happiness from money is bad because you're never gonna feel enough. You will constantly compare your benefit with other people that have high position with you, exactly because economic benefit is always sacrifice one another. For example, your boss will get more benefit because they can exploit you even more, and you get more benefit because you're taking local people land for business district and gentrification. Therefore, it's gonna be not end game. Proud to open up closing house.
I thank the member of government for that speech. Quick reminder, everybody, please be mindful of your time as we are not going to take any more notes after 7 minutes and 20 seconds. That being said, I call upon member of opposition. Here.
Hi, can I go to the toilet? Sorry, lo. Okay, can I go to the toilet first? Agak jauh dari my room. Just like 1 minute. 1 minute.
Yeah, sure.
Hi, I'm already back. Is my voice audible?
Yep, you're audible, and anytime you're ready.
Audible, yeah. Okay, cool. For POI preferences, please just unmute yourself because I'm not gonna check the text. I'm gonna take one for engagement towards closing. I guess if not opening, I'm going to over one at like 5 minutes. In minute 5, if I don't get your POI before then probably just wait. I'm gonna over one. Okay. Sorry, before I move on, just wanna do a quick shout out, just like everyone did here. First of all, obviously a quick shout out to my boyfriend and my coach, Kusha. You've been like a very important role in my life. You were my coach since I was in high school, and you're also my coach until I get into varsity. Obviously to UDF that support us, obviously also to JJ, also to Daniel that crystallize our strategic skill in this meta debating world. But lastly is that I wanted to quit debating 2 years ago, but like there is this one person who constantly asked me to go to competition. He brought me my first intervarsity champion trophy. When he passed away, I promised him that I will go to NUDC Grand Final and I will continue his legacy there. It was a rough and rocky start, but Amos, if you're watching me from up there, I made it, and Hope you're having a blast. I really miss you. This one is for you. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I absolutely agree with opening opposition that not everyone is liberal, but I think the biggest fatal mistake from OG is the fact they never explain why individual who cares about democracy necessarily cares about the liberal progressive policies. Since this is not a fiat in the debate, right? The only fiat in this debate is that you care about democracy, and caring about democracy does not mean that you're a progressive individual. Their argument can only run insofar as they explain why liberalism necessarily means better democracy. I know that Kevin has said this literally means better participation in politics, and I think beyond the reason that given by OO, the most important response to this is that participation has never been a problem in Indonesian politics, right? Because Indonesians have high voter participation. This is because people do not vote on the basis of policies, but rather cult of personality and personal relatability towards the figure. Secondly, is that Indonesia have minimum voter suppression. This is like what happened in US when people who live in the Bronx area are not allowed to go to elections area. This does not happen in Indonesia, right? But thirdly is that money is not really a big factor in Indonesian politics. This was like serangan fajar responded by hashtags like ambil uangnya, jangan pilih orangnya, and so on, right? Fourthly, we have very dynamic political constellations, obviously because we have so many political parties, unlike the two-system party and winner-takes-all system that happens in the USA, right? This means there are structural reasons why participation has never been a problem to begin with, right? Without this analysis, none of their argument can run. But secondly, is that it is not true that there's no policy that discriminate. It is not true that there's no there is a policy that discriminates women right now. So I don't think like if you the logic is that I'm going to vote for candidates that is better for women. I don't think there are one candidate right now that used the campaign for discrimination, less discrimination towards minority, right? Or like supporting LGBTQ. I don't think that's realistic in Indonesia. So there's no candidate under your side. But also like the same problem happened in opening opposition, by the way, when they assume that liberalism and good economic policies are mutually exclusive. Spoiler alert, it's not. Liberal values support things like free trade and higher redistribution that basically propagate in economic consumption anyways, because liberalism also means lesser identity politics and evaluating candidates through policy making. And if liberalism exists under Gov, then good economic policies exist there too. It is not their trade-off to begin with. But secondly, if it's that true that it's a very, very crucial economic problem, means every candidate will represent this idea anyway, even the most liberal one, because obviously they want to get elected. And if the public demand is like about economy, that will happen under your set also, hence. But thirdly, if that this is just an individual votes and what matters is that what you see as valuable, then I'm not sure why their argument in regards of representation and democratic violation will happen under your side, because that's like what you said, it's just one person and your democratic preferences are valid. Even if you choose liberalism, it's not going to detriment the whole essence of democratic values to begin with, right? So I'm not sure if OO has any case at all after this. How does this look like under CO's extension, right? Is that we say that Indonesians has never voted candidates through their policies, and this is very, very crucial, by the way, because how does politics works in Indonesia, right? Because no benches actually explain this, right? There are two parameters in terms of how Indonesians actually use their votes. Firstly, is that they use their vote for the figures that is perceived to be competent and credible, often get voted, in which this means that policy discussion often becomes sidelined in the end of the day, right? This looks like three things. They selling their persona as opposed to policies. This is like, obviously, this looks like this one candidate from PDIP that go from like one kampung to another kampung and smiles and actually helping the citizens to begin to who is this. Secondly, this persona doesn't not even have to be substantive. You just have to be kind. You just have to tap into the class relatability, like how we vote for Jokowi because he actually very, very relatable to the low class of voters, right? Also, they also use affiliation to other prominent figures, for instance, like the son of like previous presidents and so on, right? But secondly, this looks like affiliation towards mass organization that people have affiliation with, like NU or Muhammadiyah, right? Because Indonesians are very, very primordial and strongly identify with certain group which has religions and ethnicity, which are you do have like grassroots influences and can mobilize people to a certain cause. What does this mean is that later policies, unlike in the US, will never be the basis of voting in Indonesia. And if this is true, then no argument from opening opposition can run, because like literally people will not vote under the basis of economic policies under their side also. How does this structurally influence Indonesian politics? Right? Because we say that campaign of Indonesian politics will never use things like emphasizing on your policies, right? Let's emphasize on this means that all these arguments in regards to better policy making will never happen under CG. But also, if nationalism is a very big pride to begin with, and they still use identity politics, means that most likely just be the basis of their campaign will go against your liberal values, because liberal values means lesser identity politics, and therefore if like majority of like politicians do this, eventually then you probably do not have any liberal candidates that you can vote to, because it's not just about the policies, it's about how did they use their campaign. If they use their campaign using identity politics and like this type of personality, most likely if you're supporting liberalism, you're not going to vote this individual anyway, right? What this means that the prerequisite of democratic participation and discourse will always go against liberal values to begin with, right? But secondly, is that if there's also no candidate who will support this on the basis of policies to begin with, right? Because the majority demand does not exist because like the political power isn't there. Insofar as like there's no people who actually fight for these politicians to make policies that are good towards discrimination and so on, right? This means there's no majority demand in terms of the policies to begin with, but also there are structural incentives as to why there is no going to be politician that's going to pander to liberal ideas. Because note to you that a lot of like the high-ranking incumbent right now and high-ranking politicians are people that it came from the post-authoritarian regime and like official retired military people. This looks like people who were like military people in post-authoritarian countries like Prabowo, for instance. These are the people who eventually promote conservative and authoritarian ideas. This is why structurally inside the parliament in itself, even like you have like a good liberal candidates, they most likely are unable to pass their policies because they are the majority of the constituent inside the parliament are highly conservative and highly affiliated in that particular idea, right? What does this mean? Is that the determining how you vote in election does not always mean you're going to vote, but it also means abstention, right? And abstention will most likely happen in their side if there's no people that actually can cater to your liberal thingy in terms of like their campaign and also their policy to begin with. What does this mean is that probably if there is individual who wins through election, which is not going to happen due to the structural reason that I told you before, is that probably the democracy is already rigged insofar as it is not the preferences of the majority of the people underground, right? This means that if liberal values, liberal candidates wins under their side, means that this probably already determine the course of the democracy to begin with. But secondly, if it's true that democracy is about high participation to begin with, high participation will not happen under their side once they participation will not happen under your side insofar as that you probably will only choose to do abstention, right? As someone who cares about democracy, obviously democratic participation matters. Obviously, the integrity of democracy happens. This will not happen under their side. So proud to oppose.
I thank the member of opposition for that speech. To close the case from the government bench, I go up on government whip. But before that, reminder, POIs. It's getting late to the later part of the debate, so let's increase engagement. In that case, government whip, all yours.
Hello, am I audible? Okay, splendid. If you want to POI, please do it on the chat box. I'll probably prioritize one from opening. So yeah. I'm gonna start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Two issues in my speech. Firstly, let's talk about opening government, the theme of political participation and representation to minority. And secondly, let's talk about opposition side about strategic political move. Firstly, let's talk about OG, right? I think there's a very interesting framing coming from OO, and I really like this. The moment they say that this is debate as an individual and not as a collective one. This proves to you that all the political argument, participation, and macro level debate is less important in comparison to our principal argument about guilt and complicity, right? Although opening government have a very good argument, I have two structural questions in their speech. Firstly, why democratic equals to liberal? And secondly, OO's question about the ability to change the overtone window as an individual, right? This is important because this is the prerequisite of all the case. Firstly, let's characterize who are these people. I think it's very not strategic for Hans to say that you don't care about this, because we analyze to you that people who cares about democracy are the extremely woke individuals. Indonesia is a country who have a considerably strict freedom of expression and a low ability to question the democratic institution. 4 examples of this. 1, the fact that we have UU ITE to prevent us from criticizing the government institution. 2, the fact that we have 32 years of autocratic demagoguery. Thirdly, religious institution that makes us not able to question God and the Prophet. And fourthly, competitions like NUDC who prevent us from name dropping dropping because we can make them offended, for example. This proves to you that there is a structural incentive for the state to actually makes us not question the authority and the democratic institution of the state, right? Therefore, this is not the average individual. This is not the average Indonesian, right? We are talking about people who deeply care about the democratic system. Who are them then? We are talking about people who has already been exposed and internalized the external values outside Indonesia. We are talking about westernization. We are talking about people who have been listening to the grievances of the minority or become the victim of the circumstances. They have listened to the rigged democracy that exists in Indonesia and the United States of America that has go outside the echo chamber, right? These are the people who has already internalized the belief despite the structural barrier that exists in Indonesia itself. Therefore, we are analyzing to you that this is the woke individuals and not people who just care about the vague idea of democracy or a vague idea of like economics and so on and so forth, right? This is why we analyze to you that liberalism is very important for people who deeply cares and question the institution of democracy in itself. But secondly, can we change the Overton window? Probably not, right? I think this is a very good question coming from the opening opposition, and therefore all the structural argument, macro argument coming from all the three benches is not very important, right? Because in our side of the house, we brought to you the principle of what will these people feel the moment they vote for the non-liberal individuals, the moment they vote for the quote-unquote lesser evil instead. They will be complicit of the harm that came to the minority. They will feel their life in guilt because they contribute nothing, and because they for example become the beneficiary of the minority oppression. For example, when they vote for the lesser evil but the policy is bad and the oppression of the Eastern Indonesian actually happens, for example, they will feel like I am complicit to this. I give the power and authority to the incumbent government to oppress the minority, for example. This makes you cannot sleep. This makes you depressed and have an existential crisis. This is why if this debate is about an individual, notice that the moral value of this individual is constructed by the question towards the moral authority in itself. That's why our argument about being complicit and the feel of guilt is actually very, very important. And therefore we can. If we go to their side of the house, in which you do not choose for the liberals, that's the moment you are being the agent of harm. You are being the minority oppressor that you are supposed to go against in a democratic system. But before going further, opening.
Motion is about main priority. In your side, you must trade off economic for the sake of liberal. Means tipping point should be on contribution. Not voting can result into complicit of leader with bad economic policy chosen.
Yeah, that's my second issue. Let's talk about the second issue, right? Let's talk about opening opposition strategic political move. I think OO gives a suicide clashing characterization because they say that this debate is on the individual level, so we cannot shift the Overton window. But at the same time, they want to go for strategic political move in which like one voice doesn't really matter and do not change the Overton window. But therefore, I think opening government clearly wins in the opening exchange because they say that conservatism still exists in their side of the house. People who cares about economy still exist in their side of the house. And even OO step their own case. The moment they say that economic and Islamism is very important for these individuals, therefore, if that's the case, you will still have Islamic party, economic party, and so on and so forth. Therefore, that will still be catered in their side of the house. So people who cares about economy and if it's very important, they will use it as a main priority instead, but not me as an individual, right? Therefore, for people who cares about that, that's already been catered and not the most vulnerable actor in the debate, especially when we're talking about one individual who have a distinctive moral characteristic. But let's assume that this debate is about politics, that this debate is on the macro level. Unlike opening government, who wants to win a policy, even if unlikely, we do not care about winning a policy. Why? Because what do we want in our side of the house? We want to have at least one party or one candidate, for example, to go in the election, for example. For example, just like the liberal young party that I do not want to name drop, for example. Or for example, when we speak about liberalism on Twitter or social media, for example, why this is important? Three things. One, we are talking about agency. In status quo, the political sphere is deeply oversaturated by conservatism, be it the nationalistic one, Islamism one, or the economic one, right? Therefore, in status quo, people have no agency upon the choice in the political system. You your vote is just a forced consent because you only have one ideological choice, right? This is why we mechanize the opening government as well. So even if these democratic people are not necessarily liberal, but we at least give the choice for the big voters to choose for liberals, and therefore, if democracy is having an option can only exist in our side of the house when you at least have one alternative option. But secondly, minority, when they read this narrative, when they go into the political campaign that supports them, they feel the safe space, right? They feel like there's another person that care about them, care about their grievances, especially when the other counterfactual and incumbent actually go against them, especially when they come from the conservative as well, right? This is why at least the moment you read them, you feel like you are not alone, that there is someone who fight for you, that gives you a sense of security. But thirdly, Tere gives you an analysis of meeting in the middle ground. That is, if you go for your high demand in itself, the center left point will look like a bargain, and therefore you can shift the overtone window to the center left. This is why, for all that reason, for all the individual level and the political level debate, UGM wins. Locally rooted, globally respected. UGM.
All right, I thank Government Whip for that speech. To close the entire debate, I call upon the opposition whip. Here.
Hi, check. Am I audible?
You are audible. It would be great if you can also turn on the camera.
Yeah, wait. I'm still working on that. Okay, am I clearly visible now? Oke, bentar mau pasang mikrofon biar nggak usah dipegang. All right. Hope I'm still audible. Gender prefer pronoun she, her, but feel free to just refer me as up with. No one will refer me anyway, because I'm the last speaker. Several shout out, just like everyone else in this debate, since it's like my first time going to open grand final in this such prestigious competition, because all of those kind of things that I've experienced because I've failed for NSDC twice, and this is like the most proudest moment that I've ever felt in my life. Shout out to God that have given me this opportunity. My parents that already supporting me since high school and not preventing me to joining debate, because debate also make me super stressful, I guess. And yeah, just also another shout out for my high school debating community, UDF, senior coaches, everyone else that I cannot mention one by one in this particular shout out, because I love you so much, guys. Please pay really huge attention, because this speech are contributed for you, because you are someone very special, and also for the other institution in the other teams inside of this grand final. Appreciated for you, the judges as well. I love you, everyone. Okay, POI preference, just unmute yourself, because I might not be able to check the chat box. Prioritizing any engagement from side government will take one, probably. Yeah. Okay, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Caring to democracy is something that is most important for this individual, or for us as the young individual, because I feel that government bench, when they concede on abstain as their trade-off, but they never also engage, where it is fine, because they said that they want to have the representation to the fullest, they want to have better political participation, that they agreed, but they agreed on abstain. This particular framing directly clashing and disconstructing the whole government bench's argument, because it relies on this kind of analysis. Even I don't find this kind of analysis in GovWeb to proven where it's still fine. Because, and even more on that, I say that my members' argument and contextualization still matter and stand in until the end of the debate, because Whip never responded, never give any single response toward her idea and any kind of other glorification integrated in my speech, right? Because we also say that if you support this, like you prioritize this, you will not feel represented, you will not vote, and because it is not your interest, so you probably only focus on the education in CG, or you will just only focus on the discourse in OG, but you will never like try to have those kind of political participation to the fullest, right? Two things that I will talk in my speech. Number one, to engage to the idea of CG. Second, to OG. Number one, then moving on to CG, because CG is like, yeah, the one that I can respond a lot, right? Because OG already been responded by my member beautifully as her looks. Firstly, then, two things that they say. Number one, loyal voter will still vote anyway. Two responses. No, number one, no, you cannot assume this. Exactly because when the persona of their favorite candidate change to liberal, they will do mass protest. Not that this is the precedence when a candidate shifted or not so pandering to their persona that they preferred on, they do full week protest on the street, and in most regions in Indonesia, I bet you know the events, and like this is causing a huge cost on the productivity, on the mobility of society on the ground, meaning two things. Number one, they will have bigger check and balances capacity for their favorite candidate, and likely to be heard even more, because exactly they are the essentials, they are the biggest voters block that these candidates need to pander on. Second, grassroots education and changes need to be elaborated well, where this is likely to be accepted, where this is likely to be attained in less than 2 years. Exactly, they concede because they concede the context on this is more onto this. They need to also explain why they need to also explain why they're like collectivizing people, the amount of time you need to collectivizing people. You need to gather a lot of people and like dividing the regions, for example. It is likely and possible only in 2 years, because then the motion itself already stated that it's for 2024, not like for the future or like more future election OG. And so on and so forth later. Secondly, then, second responses on this. Now, because even when they will still vote anyway, CG need to explain two things. Number one, why do not they want to constant check and balances in time of residency and constantly judge them because they have the right as the loyal basis. Second, why this candidate will still in line with their campaign promises of policies, because exactly, my member already told you beautifully that this candidate in Indonesia is unique when they have focused more on the persona, not on the policies. Exactly, backlash and inconsistency of policy campaign promises happened a lot. It's already precedent that I bet you already know that I don't need to mention it one by one, because we say at best inside CG, when education is there, they need to still explain where it's likely for these people to and your collective movement to give the education to the fullest, because it requires a lot of money, means you need to have significant donation, means you will not giving the education holistically, because people on the ground will still not having the systemic access to the policies and further check and balances on their side of the house. So we say that their point about loyal voters who still vote anyway could never stand anymore in this debate. Point letter, don't badger. Secondly, then, on the idea of compromises, right? These first two responses on this. Number one, if this is possible, means you are not bringing the liberalism point to the fullest, which also possibly trigger incumbent to force you to even more compromise, because they have the imbalance of power. Exactly, you will force to do this, and you will have no power at all. Your liberal value will not be like upholded. Those kind of equality you already like dreaming of, you already envision, will not be there, right? But secondly, then, vote for lesser evil is okay, it's possible to happen in your side of the house, but when you are being inconsistent and willing to cooperate when candidates not pandering too much to liberal in bare minimum, exactly, people inside your chamber will question the benefit you have that you offer to them, means changes will unlikely in your side. This is important because you are as a new movement or like collective movement, you need these people power as your main benefit to also the likelihood to those kind of analysis CG already brought, because this idea is non-existent. I don't think the compromise idea that CG tried to champion in this debate could still stand. But lastly, then, on the idea of individual people that they want to champion, right? They say that, oh yeah, you will have like cognitive dissonance because you want to donate, but you have this kind of restriction, or like you already like enjoy the privilege by yourself. But I don't think that this is exclusive, because in our side, if you rethink your decision to enjoy the privilege you have, yeah, you can donate the money. I don't think that it is exclusive and valuable inside CG that they can take on this kind of individual level, but they need to but the burden that they need to take in this debate is that on the cognitive dissonance, because you are voting for the lesser evil, for example, or you are abstain, but you want to like having democracy to the fullest. But before I continue, BOI from OG.
So your member said that the focus should be on individuals, but then you said the focus should be on collective. But liberalism has the highest possibility to increase the idea of representation of minority and participation. So even if it is not bad, you'll be comparatively better. How does CO benefits cannot be done in liberalism?
I don't think that your POI makes sense because I'm engaging to CG on their idea of compromise to people as collective and also as the idea of individual. So it is just a matter of engagement. I don't think that this is something that that's valuable to BPO. I don't understand why. But continuing on this, right? Because we say that if my memory is true, then policy changes can happen either way. Because people vote on you based on persona, means policy changes can happen after they get voted. Overtime window is not an exclusive benefit CG can take. But the comparative is that when they use this as a way to vote for individual, you already do not vote to begin with. So I question the benefit, because inside CG, when you are abstain, you will have this cognitive dissonance because you are not voting, but you want to the best for democracy. But now you felt you are not represented anyway. This is need to be answered in CG, right? So I don't think that CG could stand in this debate anymore. Secondly, then talking about the idea of OG, they say that discourse will be still there. Their main benefit is talking only on discourse, but we say that why this can exclusive under your side, because you can still have liberal discourse under our side on the ground, like for example in your echo chamber and so on and so forth. So CEO should win this debate. Proud to represent Undip.
All right, I thank everybody for the debate and also the opposition whip for that fine closing speech. That means that's the end of the debate. We're going to see you during the closing, and after that, the announcement. So just checking with the TAP team that teams will leave this room, and then we are going to stay here. Is that how it is? Okay, give us a moment. All right, so just